is Juliana Jackson, and welcome to my session for the Experimentation the Conference. Woo, 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 woo. So today we're going to talk about the Unstructured Brain Framework. This is a framework that I came up with after digging deep into JavaScript and SQL. I am going to tell you the story of how I got to play with those bad boys, but yeah, let's just get started. I'm a senior product manager, and currently I own retention, CLV, and product experience for CXL.com and our 30,000 students. Besides that, I host a philosophy and culture podcast called Standard Deviation, which is a podcast that uncovers and studies the mental models of data analytics leaders. The reason why I probably have chosen this very esoteric topic for today. I could have talked about anything, but there you go. This framework that I came up with is basically teaching you higher order thinking and focuses on communicating only what matters and what's necessary to the conversation versus the fluff that we are used to in marketing. So as anyone else that respects themselves in the business, I went through a lot of roles in all my jobs, and however always was around product and growth marketing. So for the last 10 years, it's kind of what I've been doing. I'm starting the countdown here from 2016 when I started actually working as a full-time employee versus freelancing, because I used to freelance as well. And yeah, this is me for the last years. And even though like working in product and growth marketing involves a lot of general knowledge such as A/B testing, analytics, go-to-market strategies, product launches, whatever product management, running a backlog, prioritizing things. There's a lot of work involved into growth marketing and product, but there's not that you don't have that experience necessarily of learning and working to communicate with machines. And I didn't realize that me not knowing or understanding code and understanding how things are engineered in the back end would stop me from seeing things that I do see right now. So I decided that I should experiment on myself, because it's not as pleasing when you experiment on yourself versus when you're experimenting on a website, because when you experiment on yourself, you might not be able to be objective with your results. But yeah, like I felt like that meme with Snoop Dogg when they make different accounts to sign up for a product. That was me in all my roles. It's just everything that I've been doing, but it's mostly the same thing. So I said, I didn't know exactly what I'm gonna do with my life and with my career, and I can tell you that my last year here at CXO changed me a lot, because when I got here, I realized that the company is super tech focused, and I wasn't necessarily only on the strategy side of things as I usually was. And I had a team that was doing the implementation and execution. So when you switch from strategy to implementation and execution, there's a lot of things that might go wrong. So I remember when I got hired here in my first week, Pep asked me if I am technical, and I said, well, I'm not that much, but I can learn fast and I can figure it out. So I don't think he knows how much that question messed with me, because like I needed to know, I needed to do more because I wasn't technical enough. And I didn't, like when I started, I didn't know that was such an important thing to be successful in my role, because I didn't need to be that technical in my past roles as a CMO, as a head of product or whatever. So when you're in this moment with yourself, and this is like the research that I did before, the experiment on myself, is like you want to talk to someone smarter than you, or someone that has seen the movie before, which was my qualitative research for this. So I called Steen Rasmussen. Steen Rasmussen is a really, really cool guy. He's the VIH Nordic. It's actually one of the biggest digital analytics companies in the Nordics region. So I was talking to Steen, complaining like, Steen, what I'm going to do with my life? I need more details. I'm not technical enough. I think I'm not technical enough. I don't know what's going on. And basically what Steen told me was amongst the lines of, that I'm very good at networking and I'm very good at building relationships with people, but I also need to understand how to communicate with machines And because it's a very big difference in these types of communication. So when you're working in a company that's very technical, and a lot of you might be surprised to learn that CXL is very technical. The people that are used to communicating with machines have a different way of general communications versus people that are used to communicating just with other people. And I think what unlocked it for me was, what's gonna happen on what I'm gonna talk to you about next. So I'm pretty sure that Steen didn't want me to jump and learn how to code. He probably just meant I should read some articles. But my idea was like, okay, I need to learn how to communicate with machines because I don't understand exactly where he's coming from. This enters the chapter of Love and Loathe, and or how I started then, learning how to communicate with machines. So at that point, my unstructured data, this was happening last year in November. And my unstructured data back then was promises from leaders and people around me, my own ambitions, and I'm still suffering from my own ambitions. Thank you very much. It was peer pressure, it was social media, it was bad self-confidence, and just living other people's dreams and not my own. And I think when you're working for a company, sometimes you might identify yourself with the mission so much of the company that you forget about your own mission. Luckily, while working at CXO, that never happened to me because here people are very supportive of your individuality and your own things. I'm super grateful to Pep for that because he has been super supportive with me with the podcast that I'm doing and everything else. But I had to unlearn a lot of things before I was ready to embark in this journey of learning code and learning how to communicate with machines. So this love and loathe list that I had to do was very important for me to be able to be ready to go to the next level. So yeah, this is how I went in, and I started with JavaScript and I started with SQL. So the reason why I chose JavaScript, and this is how I thought. I was like, I need to learn JavaScript a bit just so I can read data better. And I want to learn SQL because I want to ask better questions. So I mean, with JavaScript, it's pretty evident because you have to use it with your analytics tools and to make sense of your data better. But with SQL, it was more like a philosophical thing for me. I think in a way, so like the best example that I can give you is that when you're doing a query in SQL, there's no need for any type of fluff to be added in that query to get your answer. So like versus the relationship that you have with the person, and like if you know that person, you have to talk to them in a way, or you have to ask a question in a certain way. So basically the question that you ask comes a bit, like not manufactured, because I don't want to give it a bad connotation, but it comes in a way that it's I guess manufactured to cater the person that you're asking the question to. But when it comes to querying a database, you have to be very precise, and you have to be just basically give the machine what they want to be able to get your answer. So both with JavaScript and SQL, I was finally understanding the communication that is effective and the communication that contains only things that matter. As a marketer, it's impossible I guess for us, it's like a disease to always try to look for fluff or to say things in a better way because you think it's gonna sound better or sound cooler. But once I was put in front of just, with just the code and having to query something to find out the answers that were asked of me in the assignments that I did and on data camp, for instance, with SQL, it didn't matter. I just had to focus on communicating only what matters to get my answer. So I also learned accountability. I also learned teamwork and higher order thinking. And what I want to say here is that the way this translates to the business world is that sometimes we're so distracted by what's going on around us that we, because of this, I guess, because of this noise that's happening, we're not capable all the time to determine what things are opportunities for our business and what things are threats for our business. And this possibility to discern between the two comes from a higher order thinking and being able to actually ask yourself the right questions and actually be able to focus on what really, really matters. So this is when this basically aha moment came for me, and it really changed the way I look at things and changed the way I work and the way I deliver on projects. And because I like frameworks, I had to put it in a framework and come and share it with you guys here today. But before we get there, I just wanted to share this very personal loathe list that I had to do to be ready. I was mentioning it earlier in the presentation. So, for people that don't know me, and I know I say this a lot, but it's funny. For people that don't know me, I think you would be very surprised to see what's in my load list, because I am known for being pretty good at those stuff, or suspected that I would like such things. And I realized that I have no pleasure in doing things like content marketing, social media, blogs, whatever, advertising. I don't like chaotic work. I don't like unrealistic expectations. And I don't really like the lack of process and workflow. And I guess in my past roles, it was a mixture of this and also what I love. And sometimes, again, as I mentioned earlier, when you identify too much with the mission of the company or with the mission of, leaders and whatever, you tend to forget about yourself. It's sort of similar to those relationships that you have with someone that is pretty toxic, and you're so focused on pleasing them that you forget about pleasing yourself. So that's kind of what happened, and it's only normal because we're humans. But being able to do this and going through this, I actually understood more about what I love, which are puzzles, which is analytics, which is ops, which is documented work and discipline, clarity, technical marketing, and lifecycle marketing. So I realized that I should focus more on these things because they do bring me joy. And I don't want to sound, I forgot her name right now, but I don't want to sound like her. But they do bring me joy. And I only could have found this, I could only do this exercise just by actually asking myself continuously, like, what does it really matter? What does it make it, worth it for you? So my biggest learnings from this experience with learning SQL and JavaScript and being able to just like discern for myself, like, what's an opportunity or what is a threat or this. And there's no way I could have put them in a more entertaining way, but I realized that problem solving and decision making are both examples of very complex higher order thinking, and both involve the assessment of the environment, the involvement of working memory or short-term memory, reliance on long-term memory, effects of knowledge, and the application of heuristics to complete a behavior. And I was basically kind of just like putting equal between problem solving and decision making before, which was very wrong of me, but you live to learn. You know that we are always talking about solving business problems, right? But like, do we really understand what the problem is? So the way I was able to define problems was just basically a gap between a current state and the desired goal state, right? So problem solving is actually just a set of cognitive operations that a person engages into changing this current state to go beyond the gap, beyond the impasse, to get to the desired outcome. That's the problem solving, like the actual steps that you take to solve the issue that you have. And problem solving in general actually just involves the mental representation of the problem state and the manipulation of this representation in order to move closer to the goal. And just like all these words just basically mean that you will be able to understand the problem and just relate to the problem. So you will be able to explain it and break it down in small pieces to know what are the steps that you have to take to be able to solve it. So research in general has generally approached problem solving by examining the behaviors and cognitive processes involved. And what this means is basically you have to constantly work on researching ways to solve a problem, the steps that you do. A lot of times you need less steps, a lot of times you might need more steps. So this is just the optimization phase of problem solving. And everything that we do in experimentation, or what we do in CRO, personalization, or whatever you're doing as a business, in business, is just a set of steps that you are taking in order to solve a problem. So I was telling you in the beginning that it was kind of like just saying that problem solving and decision making is sort of the same thing, but it's actually not, because the decision making process is selecting and choosing one action or behavior out of several alternatives that you have. But like problem solving, also decision making involves the coordination of resources, and this is called the resource allocation, and the coordination of your memories and steps and whatnot. So what I want to say here is that first you will define the problem, then you will define what are the steps to solve that problem, which is basically breaking down the problem into smaller achievable goals until you solve it, until you get to your outcome. And the decision making is basically just selecting what is better from those steps to pursue. And this is just like you could say when you're doing when you're building different hypotheses, this is where you would use decision making to see what is the best way further and what is something you would like to test first. And there's again, like another thing that I wrote down here, which is the last one from the slide, is that research on decision making has paid particular attention to the cognitive biases that account for suboptimal decisions and decisions that deviate from rationality. And yes, of course, because you're always going to have cognitive biases come in and intervene a lot with the decision-making process when you're solving a problem. And the funny part is that, as I was telling you in the beginning, when you're experimenting on yourself, there is when the cognitive biases just come and have a party, and there's like nobody winning. So it's very important to try to be objective with yourself when you're experimenting on yourself, when you're trying to grow as a professional. So without further ado, now that I just gave you like a bit of research and a bit of insight of how I thought this through, this is the framework that I use to solve problems and to help me with decision making. And I called it Unstructured Brain Framework is because I've been working a lot with unstructured data, and every project has unstructured data, and every person that is involved in a project needs to organize and clean and model the data that they're going to work with. So this framework will definitely help with deep understanding of what you need to solve, really being able to focus on what matters. And again, this is why I love SQL, because it really forces you to ask only the right questions. Otherwise, the answers that you'll get are useless. They focus on documentation, which is one of the most important things in executing, right? Being reliable to your company and team, strong capability of troubleshooting and reiteration, and being an absolute badass when it comes to your team's performance, because team wins are better than me wins. So based on what we talked earlier, this is a 10-step framework that you can use to work on your projects or to understand problems better and prepare solutions to the problems that your business has. So first, you have to understand the problem that you're solving. You have to relate to the problem. This is when you have to spend enough time being able to look at it from different perspectives and use critical thinking. And this is when you do not want to outsource your thought process to tools or to other people or to social media. This is when you want to go in and just be able to understand what you are trying to solve. For this step, it's very important to also know the business model and understand the market and understand where your business is in the market. It's not just a thing of being a specialist and just knowing marketing or just knowing product or experimentation. It's very important to think about things like unit economics, about finance, about the market, about what's going on in the market. There's always very, very important contextual things that are going on that affect the way you will understand your problem and affect the way you will solve that problem. Then this is a very underrated step, is formulating the problem, like actually saying with words, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? If you're not able to do this, it means you do not know the problem that you're trying to solve. And this is where I always think about the mental model. Just because you know the name of something, it doesn't mean you know that's something. So actually formulate the problem. And this is where the the problem solving mindset comes from, the one I was talking about earlier, when you should basically write down a plan to solve this problem, step-by-step plan. Like, what would be the steps to solve the problem that you have? And then you have to test this, like I call that the solution. You have to test the solution before you do any type of implementation in your project. You have to make sure that you check documentation. You have to make sure that you check the processes, see if your solution is problem possible, see if you have enough resource allocation to be able to solve it. And then once you are testing the solution, you will be able to document the testing phase, because a lot of fun things happen in the testing phase, and you will learn what things went wrong, what things went right. And this is going to actually help you go to that decision-making process and decide which steps are most important or most relevant or most efficient to solve the problem that you are trying that you're trying to solve. And then is when the implementation phase comes. Then once the implementation is done, again, you have to document it, because you want to make sure that everything that happened in the implementation phase is known by everyone in your team, so everyone is aligned, not just yourself. And then after that is done is when you start reporting on the solution that you implemented. And then once you're starting to see data, you have to get to the point of documenting the process, the wins and losses. How did your test perform? How did your solution perform? And then the last step is obviously optimization. You learned what worked, you learned what didn't work, and now you're ready to optimize and fix the business problem that you started with. So just to give you like an example, if for instance you're an e-commerce company and you're an agency and you're working with an e-commerce company that tells you that they have a bad customer retention. Well, that's a very broad problem, right? And statistically, actually, I feel like one of those people that say, actually having a retention problem can have a lot of painful heads, right? It's like one of those big zits that have a lot of heads, so you don't know exactly which one is. And I do realize that is a very disgusting example, but I'm going to keep it because I have a zit right now on my face. So when you have a client that's an e-commerce company that has a retention problem, actually, there is not just one problem, there's a multitude of problems, but you have to understand what causes it, right? So when the first step as an agency with an e-commerce brand and you're trying to fix their retention rate, you first need to understand what causes this. What is the context that causes the problem for this company? It might be that the product is shit. It might be that they don't have anything in the customer journey that helps people stay longer. It might be that the customer support is trash. It might be a lot of things. So this is when you actually have to formulate the actual question and the problem. What is causing this brand to have a low retention rate? And it can be a whole sum of different things, but you have to go and dig into them. So you have to write down a plan to solve this problem. So you have to find out what is causing this, what is the context, what is the market, what's the product, what's the customer support. Like, you have to do a lot of digging deep before you are able to implement anything. So once you find out, like, your problem at first is not to solve your client's retention rate. The problem first is to find out why their retention rate is bad. So then you have to write down a plan on how to figure out what is going wrong for this brand. Let's say you decide to do different customer surveys, you decide to do jobs to be done. These are solutions that you decide that you have to solve the problem, which is why this brand has a low retention rate. And then you have to test if these things work, if these things have legs and they can walk. And then once you do this testing for the company, you're going to be able to verify what's going on. Do they have the data? Do they have possibility of talking to customers? Are they doing something? They do something in advance? Are you able to implement something in their setup that can trigger coded surveys? Are you able to interpret the codes from the surveys? Like, there's a lot of things that happen when you're going on a research journey to solve a business problem. So once you are doing all these things, you have to make sure you document them. It's very important for your team and the team that works on this project to be aligned, right? And then the implementation phase, when you get to it, you will have to decide from all those things that you tested: surveys, jobs to be done, exit surveys, nurturing flows, email surveys, whatever you tested, to figure out what happens. You have to make sure that you decide on what's best, like what's the best solution to find out what is going on with this company's retention rate. So then once you implement the best solution to find your answer, you have to document what's happened, what's going on, and then start reporting on the things that you have implemented. Document the process wins and loss. And then on the optimization phase, you are going to be able to create the actual flow, a loop maybe, of things that you do to understand why is this company having a problem with the customer retention. Most of the time is because they have a really shitty retention strategy or a shitty post-purchase experience. But that doesn't mean that's my heuristics, that's my gut. But unfortunately, gut doesn't help you. You need data, you need documentation, and you need the set of processes and resource allocation before you say, oh, this company has a 25% retention rate, is bad. I need to do segmentation and send, and love the shit out of VIPs and send them post-purchase flows and blah, blah, blah. And that's gonna solve it. Or do some jobs to be done and do some different customer journeys and so on. Like, yeah, all those things are great. But if you don't do the initial research on a company, you're just copy pasting shit that you read from social media. So my advice, not with social media, because social media is to not do what you read on social media. There's a lot of people that talk a lot when it comes to retention rate, actually, because I gave this example and I want to wrap it up with this. There's not too much you can do to increase the repurchase rate or retention rate for a brand. And that has nothing to do with the smarts of your marketing department. Retention rates in general, and I was looking at there's this course on CXO called Transactional Data Analysis, and it's taught by Kevin Hillstrom. And he was talking about his clients, which are very big brands. And he was saying statistically that a retention rate, if you increase retention rate, it can be 10% if it's a good year. It can be 5% if it's a bad year, but it never goes more than this. So there's not much you can do from that point of view. But a more interesting case is that back when I was working more with e-commerce brands, I noticed that the biggest gap when it comes to retention is between the first and the second purchase. So there's where it's interesting to look at to find out what causes people to buy from a brand for the first time and never come back. And if you get to increase that first to second, the purchase rate, then is when you can actually have some legs to grow and to bring money to the client. But anyway, that was a parenthesis. This is how the framework works. I have been testing this for, I don't even know anymore how many days, since last year. I realized that it does forces you to structure your brain. It does forces you to work with the process, and it also increases the chances for your team to be more aligned, to be on the same page, and it's forcing you to ask yourself better questions rather than just jumping and doing things. And again, it stops me specifically from outsourcing my thought processes to group thinking or higher ups or tools. And it encourages collaborative work with my team and more results due to focused work and collaboration. So this was me. I'm Juliana Jackson. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can find me on Twitter or on YouTube. I have more subscribers right now. This is an older screenshot. Or you can find my podcast, Standard Deviation, or Apple, or your favorite. And I hope this was good. And I'll see you guys on the internet.